This is the Ernie Stadbeck Show with your host, Ernie Stadbeck. To get in touch with Ernie, write to Ernie Stadbeck, 378 South Van Buren Avenue, Barberton, Ohio, 44203-4014. By phone at 330-644-7724 or online at erniestad@aol.com. Now, here's Ernie with today's program.
Welcome to our show today, and today we've got a special guest, Colonel Col Bailey, Professor of Aerospace Science at Kent State University. Did I get that right, Colonel?
You did, yes.
Okay, and he cautioned me. He says, why don't you call me Skip, as there is no way I can call a colonel by his first name, since I was in the Air Corps and in the Air Force, and old habits die hard.
I appreciate
Colonel,
that.
can you tell us a little bit about your position now at Kent State and your background? Give us a bio.
Absolutely. Well, right now I'm at Kent State University, like you said. I'm the commander of the Air Force ROTC there. We have about 90 cadets. I teach one class, the seniors class, and then I have a staff of 5. And I have a couple other officers that teach and a couple of enlisted, and then Mary, our wonderful secretary. So enjoy it. I've been here since July, so I'm still kind of getting used to it. I'm finishing up my first year there, so it's been rather interesting.
What will be your next tour?
You know, I don't know if I will have one. It might be I might retire. I'm really not sure what I'll do. I would guess they would take me out of ROTC, may put me back into an aircraft, or they may send me to the Pentagon. It seems like that's what they like to do with lieutenant colonels, is put them into the Pentagon.
I mean, you don't have a choice, or?
I probably have a small choice, but not as much as I had when I was looking at flying airplanes is what my choices were. So now
Is
it's
it a
getting smaller.
volunteer, you, and you? Is that the same way they go today?
Absolutely, yes. The same thing I'm sure they did back when you were in there as well. So
Yeah, is your preference to go back into flying?
Absolutely, I'd love to go into flying. I kind of they needed me to have this break from flying and go into something else. And I think now that I have done or will have done this for a couple of years, by the time they take me out of here, it would be nice to get back into flying.
You've been in the Air Force how long now?
Within about a month, I'll have been in 18 years.
And then you can retire at 20. Do you think you will?
Right now, I think if you asked myself and, of course, my wife, I think, yes, we would be retiring at 20. But, you know, it all depends on the job market.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you go into flying when you get out of the military?
I definitely have looked into it. The fact that we'll get into the airplanes in a minute, but the DC-10 rating and the 747 rating that I have would lead me right into an airline job. Absolutely.
Yes, DC-10s, Gemini Airlines, a couple of guys from Akron here. In fact, in our QB club that meets tonight are flying out of Miami in a DC-10.
Absolutely. Yeah, you see, these are a lot of, not as much passenger carriers, but cargo carriers, like you said, Gemini and those that use both the DC-10 and the 747.
Just a question, what was your gross takeoff weight on that, on the 10?
The maximum gross takeoff weight on the KC-10 was 803,000 pounds. However, they look smaller because we couldn't put the models in here, because if you tried to put this model the same size as this model, it would take up the entire table. But the gross weight on that one right there, actually, I'm sorry, I lied to you. The gross weight on this one is 590,000 pounds. The gross weight on this one is 803,000 pounds.
This is a 7.4?
747, yes.
And what do they call these in the military?
This one right here is actually a Boeing 707, and they called it the EC-135. For those people who know their airplane, it looks a lot like a KC-135, which is a refueler, and it's the same airplane painted differently with a different mission.
And then this?
This is called the KC-10 Extender. They just changed the K for the D there. And this is called the E4. It's called NAOC, National Airborne Operations Center, is what they call it.
Which one did you start on?
I started in the EC-135. I finished pilot training in 1992, and after I went to pilot training, they actually sent me to school to go get a master's degree. Once I finished that, they put me back into the airplane, and I started this at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, right outside of Omaha. Great location, really enjoyed it. Flew that one from 1994 to 1998 when they retired that airplane. So everybody always laughs at me, they retired an airplane. I guess that just makes me old if they start retiring airplanes out from under me. So we actually got to take these airplanes to the boneyard in Tucson, Arizona, which was a pretty neat experience. Kind of sad to take your airplane and actually park it for good the very last time.
And see them chopped up.
Yes.
We didn't wait around to see those.
No, I didn't do that. I didn't want to watch that at all.
Yeah. Now, you got a master's degree, and is that one of the qualifications for flying that airplane? No. Master's degree? 'Cause, boy, has the Air Force changed.
No, yeah, I got lucky, actually. They like their officers to have as much schooling as they can possibly get, but it just happened to be the timing of when I finished pilot training. It was a real interesting situation back in 1992. The first Iraq War was going on, kind of ending and everything, and they were downsizing airplanes and pilots and everything. So they, instead of sending me directly to an airplane, they decided that it would be best for me to get a master's degree. I actually have a master's degree in criminal justice, and I have yet to use it in the 16 or so years since I got my master's degree. So,
Well, maybe your time is coming.
there you go. Maybe I can.
How many hours did you get in that airplane?
I got about 1,100 hours in this airplane, like I said, until we retired it. And then right after they retired this, I went to McGuire Air Force Base, which is out in New Jersey, and went to the KC-10, learned how to fly this airplane, strictly a refueler. That's where I spent most of my time overseas, was refueling a lot of fighters during the Kosovo conflict, also known as Allied Force, and also during 9/11. I was in this airplane and did a lot of refueling for that, and then right into Afghanistan on the war on terrorism. I flew, have a lot of hours turning circles in Afghanistan, refueling fighters and bombers and everything else that you can imagine.
Can you describe the refueling process? What do you do, and how do you form up with these guys? Isn't that like trying to find a small island out in the ocean? Especially the fighter pilot. You've got enough gas to keep going.
Absolutely, yeah. We carry all the gas, and we used to give the fighter pilots a hard time if they ever started to yell at us. We told them, that we just pull the boom up and they wouldn't get the gas, and they would be the first ones to hit the ground because we have a lot more fuel. The way it works, it's actually the process is it's a very good process. We sit at a certain altitude. Typically 25,000 to 27,000 feet. We pick one of those altitudes. The refuelers come in at 1,000 feet below us. So if we're sitting at 25,000 feet, they would always come in at 24,000 feet. Obviously, you don't want two airplanes coming at the same altitude, so that's you don't want to see that. But then what we would do is we would establish ourselves on a track, and the way we would do that is it's essentially points in the sky. And those points were either latitude and longitude, or they were off of ground stations, and that's getting into probably way too much of the technology of flying and everything and trying to explain all that, but essentially it would be points in the sky, and so we knew that we would meet at a certain point, at a certain time, at a certain altitude, and that is where we would meet them. And so if we had a specific point picked out, they would come in at one altitude, we'd come in at another, and we would be at a specific airspeed, 275 knots, which is approximately 275 miles per hour, and they would usually be at about 300 miles per hour so they could catch us. And once they got us in sight, they would come from that 1,000 feet down right behind us up at a kind of about a 30-degree angle up, if you can imagine this is the tanker, and come up this way, and then they would meet us. And then the boom, which would be in the back of the airplane, would be lowered, and then they would come in from there and take all the fuel they could take.
How long is that boom?
The boom itself, there's a hose that comes out of it, I should say a hose, it's another extension of the boom, and that sticks out about 15 to 20 feet behind the airplane. So if you can imagine two airplanes of this size, because all these airplanes can also take gas, sitting about 15 feet apart and about 20, 30 feet below one another, that's what we did. So obviously, it took a little practice to get into doing something like that.
Were you sweating when that was going on?
Oh my gosh, was I sweating. The worst time I can honestly say that I sweated was when I was flying this aircraft, and my wife got a flight in a tanker, and she was sitting in the tanker watching me refuel below her. And I was so scared, I was sweating. I don't, if you've ever seen the movie Airplane, when the gentleman's trying to fly and is just sweating, that I sat there and was just shaking and trying to impress your wife by flying a receiver behind a tanker is not the way to do it. So it was definitely an interesting time, and they were trying to get me to talk to her. They said, your wife's here. Why don't you talk to her? I can't. I'm concentrating too much. I can't. And but she laughed at me for quite a while after that one. She enjoyed that.
Did you impress her though?
She was impressed. Yes, she was impressed that we could put two airplanes that big together.
Well, are you hand flying when you do this?
Yes, you as the receiver are. The tanker is not. The tanker is on autopilot, so it holds a pretty steady platform. However, the throttles, the speed is actually is hand flown. So you have to, as the tanker pilot, you really have to keep a close control on the throttles to make sure you're maintaining the right speed. When you have a fighter behind you, you don't feel it. When you put something this size or this size behind a tanker, it'll actually push your airplane up a little bit and might actually make you speed up. It's just the
You've
sheer
actually
forces.
refueled some of these big airplanes?
I've refueled all of these big airplanes, yes. I've actually flown them as the receiver, and I've flown them as these two as the tanker. So it's yeah, I've done a lot of refueling. So, and there's nothing more intimidating than flying this airplane over the Indian Ocean at 3 in the morning and having to take on 100,000 pounds of fuel. So if you want to have one of those things, if you can't really think about what you're doing, you got to concentrate on trying to get that plane up there, because if you think about everything that's going on and what'll happen if you don't get the fuel, it's pretty intimidating.
How do you find, does everybody use global positioning to locate each other?
We don't.
Well, they have to find you, don't they?
Yes, they have to find us.
Okay.
That's their job.
They have to find the gas station.
We use things called TACANs and Vortax, which send out signals, and they send out essentially they're located on the ground. They send out a signal up, and there's technically it's kind of miles that they fly off of. So we have a certain frequency that each Vortax sits at. So if you dial in the frequency, you know exactly where you are in relation to that, and so you have to fly to that point. So more of the planes are using the GPS, and you can definitely, for the newer airplanes, you can get that as well. The other thing too, you got to during like Afghanistan or during Iraq, you have an AWACS airplane that sits up there that also will tell the fighters your tanker is 270 degrees at 30 miles, and that way the fighter can fly in that direction and get to us. So that helps as well.
Can you tell the folks what an AWACS is?
I'm sorry. An AWACS is an airborne platform. They sit up. I'm sure you've seen it. It looks a lot like this airplane with a big disc on the top of it. And in the back, they have folks who have a large view of the sky and know which airplanes are what based on frequencies and codes that we put in the airplane. And they essentially direct traffic in the air.
Somebody sent me or emailed me a picture of this open door. Now, I don't know what it was. Which one of your freight airplanes where you have the door? C5. It's a
C5,
C5,
yes.
okay. Well, they opened the door and this F-16 came up. Have you seen that? This
I have not.
F-16 came up beyond, and it looked like the F-16's nose was almost into the door.
I have seen that picture also. I don't know what they were doing. I know what you're talking about, because there was 3 or 4 men standing in the ramp looking at an F-16.
Yes.
I don't know if that was.
Was that an official maneuver, or somebody was hot dogging?
Well, officially, so I don't get anybody in trouble, I have to tell you it's an official maneuver. But
Okay.
unofficially, I would say I have never seen that before.
When I saw that, I got scared. I turned the set off right away. Because that guy was coming in close. Have you flown any fighters?
I have not. Well, I lied. I got one flight in F-16 sitting in the back seat of a trainer, because typically F-16s only have one seat. And I sat back there and tried not to touch anything and held on for dear life. That's all I did. And they were doing all sorts of maneuvers. I am very happy in my big airplanes where I can give the controls over to the guy next to me and walk back and get my cup of coffee and sit down and walk to the back and talk to the people in the back, as long as there's somebody else at the controls.
A lot to be said for that. How many hours did you have when you graduated from pilot training?
I ended up with about a little over 200 hours. I probably had a few extra hours because I had trouble with one portion of pilot training, so they gave me a few extra hours to get me through that. But approximately 200 hours. I now have, between these 3 airplanes and pilot training, I have just a hair under 4,200 flight hours. So
And it's all big airplanes.
It's all big airplanes.
Great experience.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I just read the news account of that F-16 that went down on a training mission, National Guard pilot.
Yes.
He was just out of flight school, and he had 256 hours, with
Yes.
about 35 in the F-16. Well, that's a testimonial to Air Force training.
Yes. Yeah, they do. You finish pilot training, and that's the one thing about these large aircraft is the smaller aircraft, you get a little bit of time with an instructor in front of you or whatever, but these big ones, you're always going to have some sort of instructor to make sure that you're doing the right thing. I can tell you, going from a small airplane that might have small runways, enabled, you're laying right close to the ground, to this one where in this airplane you're essentially sitting 3 stories in the air. So when you land the airplane, you're still 3 stories up. If you can imagine sitting in a 3-story building and looking down, it's rather interesting to learn how to land.
I imagine it is. Hang on to that, and we're going to be back after this message. ESCO has been in business since 1954, serving the Akron area for quality, fast printing, and copying. ESCO is not about airplanes and airplane manuals, although we are the largest in the world for reproducing, buying, and selling manuals of all types to the aircraft industry, military, civilian, and general aviation. But we also do booklets, we do newsletters, we do books for folks right here in the Akron area. And people make ESCO go. Our people have been with us for 20 years, 14 years, and 12 years. Remember to give ESCO a call for all your printing needs, 330-644-7724. And our website is ESCO Aircraft. Bailey, and we're going to get into the good stuff now, the fun stuff, okay? And I'm sure that you've had plenty of them. Can you tell us about these patches? Are these the various commands you've been in?
The various squadrons that deal with each airplane, the ones I have over here in the front are all dealing with pilot training and the different squadrons. We actually, each class has a patch that we design and then use, and then we all have a scarf that we design that we, I typically don't wear scarves anymore, but in pilot training, you know, it's a bigger thing to do that. And that's what these are for the year of pilot training, the different squadrons that we go through. And then going from there, and they're not really in any order. For the EC-135 that I flew, I was actually in what was called the 7th ACS, Air Command and Control Squadron. And that was our patch for that. And the patches sitting next to it are the wing patches that go along with it. And the squadron patch is typically worn on the right shoulder, and then the wing patch was worn on the left shoulder when we were there. And the only reason I have two wing patches here is because they changed the patch. And the Air Force tends to do that. They took that second one, the bottom one down here, was part of the heritage that used to be a fighter squadron back in World War II. And they decided that they were going to make that the wing for that, the wing patch for that wing out in Offutt Air Force Base. The next one I have over here, and I'll move these over for the KC-10. Again, this was just a squadron patch. In the KC-10, they don't wear wing patches. It's a different commands, and they don't wear them. But this one here, the 32nd Air Refueling Squadron, was the squadron I was in when I first started refueling, and then I became a KC-10 instructor, and I actually taught all of the new students how to fly the KC-10, and this was the squadron that I was in there. So that was an interesting time, trying to teach new students coming from pilot training in those small airplanes to fly something this size. Again, learning how to go from landing a small airplane close to the ground to landing an airplane that sits almost 2.5 stories above the ground. So that was always interesting. And then finally, way over here, oops, as I throw them everywhere, this was for the E4, which is the 747, and the two differences there. This was just the standard. This is the first ACS, was the first Airborne Command and Control Squadron. And then this one was when I was an evaluator, and I used to actually evaluate the pilots on a yearly basis to make sure they were up to standards. So that's what all those are for.
There's a little aside on being a pilot. You know how you can tell a pilot at a party? Big watch, big boots.
I got the big watch. Definitely.
Sunglasses, and a scarf.
And a scarf. I'm doing pretty good. I got the boots, the watch, and the scarf. So.
Yeah, okay. Now we know who the pilot is.
Exactly. I'm hard to miss.
Yeah, and there's another old saying that you become a pilot when you're too lazy to work and too nervous to steal. Now that's only a saying, okay? Don't take me up on that one.
I definitely don't. I haven't tried the stealing, but definitely, my wife always asks me when you were asking about what I'm going to do when I retire, and I tell her I got to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up, because I have yet to grow up. So that's all right. I enjoy my flying.
Evidently, flying these airplanes, you know, I envy you guys from the days, from what we did years ago flying.
Absolutely.
Okay, here are some interesting things. Okay, what does this mean? There's obviously a story behind that.
Well, you know, we went to China. We took this airplane, and part of the role of the E4 is we took Secretary Rumsfeld and Secretary Gates to all different parts of the world, but we took Secretary Rumsfeld to China. And so we were in Beijing. It was a great experience. Well, we took a tour while we were there. We were there for about 4 days and took a tour up to the Great Wall. And I was always told China is a communist state. They don't, you know, it's kind of like Russia where there was no free enterprise. Well, free enterprise is alive and well at the Great Wall in China, and they had all these booths everywhere. And so we noticed they were selling Coke. And it looks like a Coke can. In fact, it even says Coca-Cola if you can read that. But we thought it was very interesting because of the figure of the lady on the front of it and then all the writing around the sides, and we decided there was no way in the world that that kind of picture would ever show up on an American Coke can. So we grabbed a bunch of them, but even the funny thing about China is, and a lot of countries are like this, but China especially, is they don't have set prices on anything. They have a price listed in front of whatever they have for sale, but you will bargain with these folks to get a better price, even on a can of Coke. And so we learned real quickly, because if you try to give them the money, they got mad at you. They didn't want the most expensive. They wanted you to bargain. That was their thing, is you'd tell them $2, and no, $3, $2.25, you know, and that's what they did. So I think we actually got this can of Coke for, I think it was about $1.25. I think it started off as $3. So we did fairly well, but like I said, with all the pictures, we thought that was rather interesting.
It'd take you 2 days to go through the supermarket.
Absolutely. Well, the supermarkets, yeah, they're a little different, but outside on all, you know, in their little things, it was definitely interesting.
And we have another one right here. Boy, this one is really interesting.
Well, the first thing
you want to tell the story about that one?
Absolutely. The first thing
Okay.
that everybody notes is that it's empty, and it's a bottle of vodka. So I have to admit that not all at once, but I did manage to drink all this down. Another trip we took in this airplane, we took Secretary Rumsfeld to Mongolia. And we were only there for about 4 hours. Secretary Rumsfeld and his staff got to go out and tour the area, and that's another story in itself. But they let us into the airport, and in the airport they had little shops there. And we're not talking a big airport. If we're talking Akron-Canton that airport that I was in Mongolia makes Akron-Canton look like a major international airport. It was not big at all. But they had a few shops, and in there they had vodka. And so we could not resist. We had no idea. I think the bottle was like $3. So we weren't sure what a $3 bottle of Mongolian vodka would taste like. But we liked the picture in the back. I'm not sure if you can see through there. And obviously the clear liquid, you could see it. But we ended up buying a whole bunch of vodka, and I think there was wine that went in there as well. So we looked pretty funny walking out to the back to our airplane with a whole bunch of vodka and wine. I think the people that were standing watching us in the airport wondered exactly how we were going to make it home. But in addition to that, I had to say one other quick story about that one, is that when Mr. Rumsfeld was taking his tour, they went around to took a tour, and we found out later that as part of the gifts for him, typically he would get a certain amount of gifts in his staff, and they would be a hat or I don't know, something small, maybe even a bottle of vodka or wine. They decided to give him a horse. Now, this is a big airplane, but I have yet to figure out where they put the stall and the hay and everything else, and I surely wasn't going to clean up after the horse in the 15-hour trip we had back. So as far as I know, they left the horse there and told Mr. Rumsfeld anytime he came back, it belonged to him.
Yeah, the horse is still there?
It's still in Mongolia waiting for Mr. Rumsfeld to pick him up. Hopefully they're feeding him.
We hope so. What's the funniest thing that ever happened to you in your aviation career? Military career.
I don't know. I was thinking about this on the way over here, and the funniest thing that I enjoyed the most in this airplane, we were during the Afghanistan Operation Enduring Freedom over in Afghanistan. We were stationed in a country called Qatar or Qatar or however you pronounce it, over in the Persian Gulf, and the area that we lived in tents, and that part of the world they don't allow alcohol. But being Americans, of course, we had to work some sort of deal out. So we worked out a deal where we were allowed 3 drinks per day. And so after you finished flying, you had a few hours off before you had to go to sleep and get crew rest for the next day. We would go to a little area that we called the wagon wheel, which was just a bunch of tables and chairs set up looking like a wagon wheel. And they had a card for us, and they'd punch it every time you got your beer, and you'd have 3 beers, and you'd be pretty excited. Well, in addition to our KC-10s, they brought in the Dutch. And the Dutch had one airplane, and it looked just like this, but it was painted white, and they had about 4 crews. Well, the Dutch didn't have any restrictions on what they could drink, so we watched them unload this airplane, and I'm not kidding you, they unloaded 40 or 50 cases of Heineken beer. So every night, we'd be sitting there having one of our 3 beers, and they'd be over in another area with their barbecues going, and everybody was drinking as much beer as they could. Well, we were sitting there with our crew, and actually we had a sister crew, so there was 8 of us sitting there, and one of the other crew, they had a boom operator, and she was a young lady. She was a very pretty young lady. And one of their crew members came over, and he looked at me, and he said, "How much for her?" I first looked looked back, I looked at her, and she gave me a dirty look, and I looked over at the beer, and I said, 1 case of Heineken.
Oh, my.
And he said, sold, and left. So I got another dirty look from her, but we just kind of sat there and enjoyed our other beers. Well, 10 minutes later, the same gentleman walks over, and he has the big cargo shorts with the pockets on the sides, and he's standing there looking at me, and I was like, what do you want? He goes, in my pocket. And I look down in his pocket, and there are 3 Heinekens in his pocket. So I pull the Heinekens out of his pocket, and he turns around, and there's 3 more on the other side. So there's 6 Heinekens. So I pass them out to all my crew, and we're drinking the Heineken as well. And he comes back 4 more times. So that I grand total, I've got 24 cans of Heineken. And so he looks at me, and I looked at him, shrugged, and I looked at the young lady, and I said, I'm sorry, he paid up. You belong to him. And boy, she did not talk to me for a week. And the good news of the story is that's as far as it went. It never was that was it. But I thought it was great. I got 24 Heinekens out of it, so it worked for me.
That's living dangerously.
Exactly, yeah. So like I said, she wasn't a big fan of mine after that, but that's all right.
Like in aviation, like in sports, there are just many, many stories.
Absolutely.
Can you have another one for us?
Yeah, I could probably come up with a couple more. Most of the stories that I have, I did a lot of flying, did a lot of what they call TDY, temporary duty to different locations. We actually we were stationed in Spain during Allied Force, which is our Kosovo conflict, and we lived on a base there. And it was interesting, if you think back to the college days, we actually had 4 of us in a room about the size of a dorm room that you'd see at Akron or Kent State. Essentially we flew, and then we stayed up for a few hours and slept and flew again. That was our pattern. Well, when we went over and were actually flying, we flew from Spain across Italy, and then we had over essentially it's up between Greece and Italy. It's called the Adriatic Sea. It's all part of the Mediterranean Ocean. Well, we would fly in those areas, and we would essentially fly a racetrack pattern, and that's what we would sit. And all the fighters would come up and refuel off of us and go over into Kosovo and do their mission and then come back. Well, I remember one day we were sitting there and we're flying in our orbit, and we're just kind of taking it easy, nothing's going on, and we see another airplane, and we don't know what it was, but we looked at it, and it was going the opposite direction, and we didn't think anything of it until we turned around again and came back the other way, and there we are, nose to nose with another airplane flying at 275 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. So you can imagine a couple 4-letter words came out of our mouths as we grabbed the airplane. We were on autopilot. Well, we just took the airplane and shoved the yoke down, and literally everybody went airborne as we dropped about 1,000 feet, so that we just missed this airplane as it literally came over our tail. So that kind of stuff, we obviously got a hold of that person in the other airplane and told them they were at the wrong altitude because they were supposed to be 2,000 feet below where they were.
Is it a military airplane?
It was from another country, but it was a military airplane that was in the wrong altitude.
Is it a big
at the wrong
airplane
space.
like what you're flying?
Absolutely. It was another air refueling airplane from a different country that was there also during that. So, yeah, we let them know it.
Could ruin your whole day.
Yes, absolutely it could. So we did that. But another story from that, I have to tell this real quickly because this one always I couldn't believe this. You figure, you make friends in the military, you meet people when you fly, and a good friend of mine, he and I flew this, and his name was Mike Costco. And after we retired this, he went into a different airplane, and I went into this airplane. And we were out, again, over Kosovo. We were out flying, doing our air refueling thing, and I was talking on the radio, talking to the AWACS that I mentioned earlier, telling them where we were and what we were doing. And as I'm talking to the AWACS and everything, all of a sudden I hear this, over the radio, I hear, "Hey, Skip, is that you?" Now you got to remember, I'm halfway across the world, and to hear your name come up on the radio, yeah, this is Skip, who is this? "Hey, man, it's Mike Costco." So, it just amazed me that sitting halfway across the world in airplanes, it tells you how far you can actually hear. He was up in another airplane that was transiting that area, heading back home, and he happened to hear me at that time.
What was he in?
He was in one of the AWACS.
Oh, wow.
But he wasn't. They were done with their mission, and they were getting ready to fly back.
He wasn't the one coming nose to nose.
No, he was not. That's another story. But
you'd have to get back at him on that one.
Absolutely, I would have to.
Okay, well, Colonel, thanks a lot. Notice I'm saying Colonel again. I'm not saying Skip. And thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. It was always an interesting event talking to you.
Well, I thank you very much for having me here.
Remember.
This has been the Ernie Stadbeck Show with your host, Ernie Stadbeck. To get in touch with Ernie, write to Ernie Stadbeck, 378 South Van Buren Avenue, Barberton, Ohio, 44203-4014. By phone at 330-644-7724 or online at erniestad@aol.com.